Welcome back, Goofy Goobers, to Sponge Lore. My name is Eric, and I was supposed to be writing my Valentine's Day video for next week, but I saw a video about this other thing and I got frustrated, so now you're getting this. The subject I'm here to talk to you about today is a theory in SpongeBob that's widely known as the Seven Deadly Sins theory. I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard of this before, as this is one of the more widely known theories among fans of SpongeBob. Essentially, the theory states that the show is somehow based off of the seven deadly sins, and each character represents one of them. Now, I notably haven't talked about this on my channel as of yet, and that is for a very specific reason. And that reason is as follows. This theory sucks. It is by no means a practical explanation or application of SpongeBob lore. But I've been seeing this theory pop up for years now. It is much older than my channel, and I have had enough of it. I have very vast knowledge of both SpongeBob lore and Christian theology, so I am taking it upon myself to show you just how stupid this theory is. Now, just so that we're all on the same page, I'll give a basic explanation of what I'm talking about. The seven deadly sins is a concept in Christian theology which essentially states that the sins of pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth are worse than other sins because they cause a greater separation from God. That is obviously an oversimplification of it. But here's the thing. I think this is sufficient for talking about SpongeBob. There is one piece of information that I should include in this, but I'm going to say it before anything else because I don't think it should change anything in this argument, but I do think it's important to include it just for information's sake. Steven Hillenburg was a marine biologist. He was a scientist. His pages on both Wikipedia and the Encyclopedia SpongeBobia mention absolutely nothing about religion. I was, however, able to find one source that said he was a Christian, but it did not specify any denomination or church. Now, again, this is not what anyone should be basing their argument on. I just thought people might be curious. So before I get into any real determinative evidence to one side or another, I need to throw out there that this is the least creative theory that anyone has ever come up with for SpongeBob. The concept of the seven deadly sins is something that you can see in almost any piece of media ever created by man, whether they intended it to be there or not. It's not exactly clear who the first person to suggest this was, but whoever you are, if you're listening to me, you are not original, and you are not smart, because you couldn't even think about this for 3 seconds before uploading it to the internet. Just the fact that there are so many characters in the show means that there are bound to be some similarities between it and things like the seven deadly sins, because if every character had the same personality and virtue and vices, it would be a boring show that nobody would watch. This isn't some conspiracy that Steven Hillenburg started way back in 1984 when he first made Bob the Sponge. It's just math. I would also like to point out that even though this is such a widespread theory on the internet, at the time of recording this, it isn't mentioned a single time in the Encyclopedia SpongeBobia. Why is this? Because it has no real basis in actual SpongeBob lore. Now please note that I am saying at the time of recording this, because it's entirely possible that someone could see this, go on there and throw together a crappily written page with like one reference and say, no, Eric, see, it does have some basis. Because I'm not going to buy that, so don't do that. So this next bit is so base level that it is absolutely phenomenal that it was overlooked. See, for the theory to function as stated, each main character has to be assigned a unique deadly sin. There are 7 deadly sins. There are 10 main characters in SpongeBob. This has been established as a fact since season 1. Yeah, whoever thought this up quite literally did not know the first thing about basic SpongeBob lore. Most of the time this is presented, it leaves out Mrs. Puff, Karen, and Pearl, though there was one time I saw it where Pearl was substituted for SpongeBob, which excluded the title character from this theory about the main characters of SpongeBob, which was just ridiculous. Okay, guys, now we're gonna just go through each character and see how much sense they do or don't make to this theory. Naturally, we're starting with SpongeBob. SpongeBob was assigned to be Lust, and anyone who knows anything about anything can look at this and say, huh? There are actually 2 different ways of looking at this, and I'll address the more obvious one first. In our world today, lust is typically thought of in a sexual context. It is the simple fact that SpongeBob is asexual, so this just completely falls apart. Thankfully, I haven't actually seen anyone present it in this way. They usually pull up something about real lust just being about either, having too much love or wanting something really bad, and they try to force SpongeBob into this box by warping what lust actually is. You see, lust is actually to have an inappropriately strong desire for something. And you really couldn't convince me that there is any point in the show in which SpongeBob is defined by this sin. Next, we'll talk about Patrick, who has been assigned Sloth. And I can actually see why people think this, as he's usually seen as lazy, but I would personally disagree with this. You should go watch my video about the secret behind Patrick's idiocy. I'll put the link in this description. See, Patrick isn't just lazy just 'cause. Patrick is disabled. And I mean this in the most Christ-like way possible, but if you think that disabled people are going to hell just for, existing, I want nothing to do with you. Squidward is in a similar situation for me, and I'll tell you why in a moment. He was assigned Wrath. People like to point out that he can be very aggressive at times, especially towards SpongeBob and Patrick, as well as Mr. Krabs on occasion. But Squidward is actually not particularly wrathful. We can see throughout the show that Squidward seeks peace and also even adventure at times. For reference to this, you can look into the episode Tentacle Acres or even Cephalopod Lodge. So, if he's not wrathful, what is he? Well, it's actually very well known that he has depression, and he likely has another mental illness that I can't define right now. And that's why he's in the same boat as Patrick for me. Because if you think that people with mental illness are going to hell just for existing, then I want nothing to do with you. Now, I am by no means saying that Squidward has never committed the sin of wrath, because he has, but it's nowhere near enough to convince me that that's his whole character, or even that he somehow symbolizes the sin. Gary the Snail is assigned to gluttony, which really just doesn't make sense to me. They explain it as Gary is often seen eating, but so are the nematodes, and the anchovies, and Patrick, and Fred, and Dave, and Harold, and Nat Peterson, and Monroe, and a lot of others. You also have to remember that Gary is not a particularly advanced life form in terms of innovating his food supply, so he has to spend most of his time acquiring food. That's just nature. Oh yeah, and also he's dependent on SpongeBob to feed him, so a lot of the times we see him eating, it's a plot point where SpongeBob or someone else has to feed Gary. Same with Squidward. I'm not saying that Gary has never been gluttonous. He has. Just watch the episode Whatever Happened to SpongeBob. I'm just saying that that's not his whole thing. So far, 4 of the 7 parts of this theory just don't work. which really means that 7 of the 10 parts of this theory just don't work. The next 3, though, do make a little more sense, and I think that this may have been where it started. I think that someone saw that a couple of these characters worked with this one thing, and they just forced the rest of it on it so that they could make a YouTube or video or a blog post or something about it in an attempt to gain some popularity on the internet. However, like I said before, they didn't even think for 3 seconds before going public with this. Mr. Krabs is said to represent greed, which I have no evidence to dispute, and wouldn't want to anyway because it's pretty clear that his character revolves around money. I just think that it should be said that Mr. Crab developed his greed due to a childhood of poverty, so it's not like he's just a spoiled brat who has to have everything he wants. Sandy is Pride, 'cause she's from Texas. Finally, we have Plankton, who was assigned Envy. I do think that Plankton displays envy. He's jealous of what Krabs has that he doesn't have, that he believes he should have. But here's the thing. From what I know about SpongeBob, I really don't think that he was created to show or to warn about envy. He was put into the show to be a villain and an antagonist. I think that his correlation with envy was a coincidence that the show's writers did actually pick up on to improve his character after the first few seasons. If you go back and watch Friend or Foe, you can see what I'm talking about, and that didn't even air until season 5. But I do have to say this, though. With Plankton's inappropriately strong desire to have the formula and all that Krabs has, he could also be put into the lust part of this theory, right? That is, if it were a good theory. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. Subscribe to be a goofy goober, and until next time, stay spongy.